Here is the episode 4 on. What if Naruto was the successor of Lord Zeus? Now consuming no more extra time, let's move on to the video. For the next few days, Naruto began to get more at ease with how things worked at the camp. Each morning, he took Greek with Percy from Annabeth. He quickly discovered that he could read Greek pretty well, but in writing the language he had trouble with. He frequently slipped back into kanji or made a mistake on a letter that turned it into Latin, which both Annabeth and Chiron seemed pretty irked about. After that, he'd pretty much hang out with Percy all day. For some reason, Grover wasn't around very much and Annabeth was teaching Greek, so he decided to just see what Percy was doing. Besides, he was fun to hang around. The first place they went was with Chiron to the archery range. While Percy was attempting to shoot, Naruto visited with the archers and found out that many of them had no hand-to-hand skills whatsoever, something that Naruto said he would change as soon as he started teaching. He would have asked a few more questions, but stopped when an arrow sailed past his ear and into the helmet of one of the campers. Next, he followed Percy to the track, only to see him get floored by the wood nymphs. Of course, everyone else did too, but Percy took it rather hard. No one bothered asking if Naruto could match their speed or participate. It was the general consensus of everyone there that if you could practically teleport anywhere you wanted, you were probably the fastest person in camp. Percy tried out wrestling next, but was quickly trounced by Claris, who decided to beat some of her frustrations out on the black-haired teen. When Naruto was asked if he was going to participate, he laughed for a minute and said, "I'm more of the I'm going to beat you up with my bare hands kind of guy." No one really looked shocked at that, seeing as how Naruto was a ninja and from what they saw of his world, was probably trained in at least one form of unarmed combat. Percy, by this point, was starting to seem down until Naruto suggested he try canoeing. Percy still looked down, but decided he might as well try it. In the small canoe race, someone from each cabin tried to paddle from one end of the camp's bay to Naruto's new yacht and back. Percy had won by a landslide, with Naruto coming in a close second and Claris coming in third. It may not have been what everyone was expecting, but it made Percy feel better, and so after he won, Naruto invited him over to his yacht for a bite to eat and a drink. He also had a second goal to this though, as all the camp counselors were watching over the two, trying to figure out who their parents were. For Naruto, it was pretty obvious as to Percy's dad was. I mean, who else is good on a boat and is able to make bathrooms blow up with water? For himself though, he had no idea. He was good at any challenge that was put before him, whether it was smithing or archery, except for reading, especially reading and writing a response. For some reason, he hated writing, as if his DNA had done it for centuries or something and got tired of it. Maybe that's what old man Sarutobi was talking about when he was cussing out paperwork in his office. A few days had passed like this. On Thursday, he followed Percy to the sword fighting lesson. He still hadn't taken over the class, so Luke was still teaching it. "Hey Percy, Naruto. Good to see ya," Luke shouted as they were approaching. The two teens in question just waved to Luke, who went back to showing the class how to make a successful right-hand strike. Naruto created a clone and went off to practice on his personal dummy, which was made of metal. Naruto didn't tell anyone why he was doing this, but many assumed that he was actually trying to cut through it. Most didn't believe that he could, but in one of his training sessions with Kura and Raimei, they'd both mentioned that the sword could cut through metal, but only if the wielder was strong enough to use it. He asked them if they meant physical strength, to which they nodded no, but said nothing further on the matter, except that he'd have to figure it out himself. After a while, Naruto noticed that he hadn't made any progress on cutting through it, so sighed and sheathed his sword before turning back to the class. By this point, they'd all paired up and were about to begin sparring. Naruto quickly hopped over to them and noticed that they were all looking to Luke to begin. He was paired up with Percy, who looked somewhat nervous at fighting the swordsman. Luke, however, said nothing and instead looked at Naruto for the go-ahead. Naruto quickly climbed to the top of a small post that had an excellent view of the training area before he said begin. Immediately, everyone went into action against their opponent. Naruto looked over everyone at least once, but kept most of his focus on Percy and Luke. Naruto had seen some of what Percy could do and decided to see if Percy could do it again. By the time he called a break, Percy still hadn't, although he had provided some comedic relief when he got bopped on the head for keeping his guard and stance too low. As everyone went over to the drink cooler, Naruto approached Luke and asked him if he could do what he normally did after that little spar. Luke nodded before yelling at everyone, "Okay, everyone circle up." Everyone quickly formed into a circle surrounding Naruto and Luke. Naruto nodded at Luke, who then said, "If Percy doesn't mind, I want to give you a little demo." The Hermes guys were suppressing smiles. Naruto figured they'd been in Percy's shoes before and couldn't wait to see how Luke used him for a punching bag. After conversing quietly with Naruto, Luke told everybody he was going to demonstrate a disarming technique. How to twist the enemy's blade with the flat of your own sword so that he had no choice but to drop his weapon. This is difficult, he stressed. I've had it used against me. No laughing at Percy, now. Most swordsmen have to work years to master this technique. He glanced at Naruto and said, although some guys get lucky and get it from the start. Everyone couldn't help but chuckle at the face Naruto made. It wasn't because they thought he got lucky, it was because Naruto had soundly beaten them all into the dirt on his first try. After everyone had finished laughing, he demonstrated the move on Percy in slow motion. Sure enough, the sword clattered out of his hand. Now in real time, he said, after Percy had retrieved my weapon. We keep sparring until one of us pulls it off. Ready, Percy? Percy nodded, and Luke lunged. Percy managed to keep his sword away from Luke just long enough so that he got a shot at Luke's sword. Within a few seconds it was over. Luke's sword was on the ground, and Percy had his sword an inch from Luke's chest. Everyone was quiet, except for Naruto who couldn't help but laugh at their faces. Of course, had seen it before on a hill, but it was still funny as hell to Naruto. Sorry. Percy said worriedly, but Luke's scarred face broke into a grin. By the gods, Percy, why are you sorry? Show me that again. Naruto saw his reluctance and decided to intervene. Actually Luke, I think that's all Hess got right now. Plus, his sword is unbalanced. I think we'd get even better results with one that was balanced for Percy. Luke nodded before asking Naruto if he would demonstrate again. Sure, but do you really want your ass kicked again? Luke smirked and said, you just had beginner's luck, that's all. It'll show you what a real swordsman is. Luke charged, and within 30 seconds it was all over. Naruto parried Luke's strike while getting in close and using the blunt side to do what Luke had described. This time though, the sword flew into the air, only to be caught by Naruto, who then twirled around in midair and landed with the swords crisscrossed across Luke's neck. Dude, you seriously need to learn to stop lunging at me, he said as he disengaged and gave Luke back his sword. Yeah, but then it won't be as educational. Luke replied with a smirk. Everyone thought they were insane, except for Percy, who had a smile on his face, knowing that Naruto always took things to the highest possible level without going overboard. Friday afternoon, Grover, Percy, and Naruto were resting on the pier. Well, more like Grover and Percy were resting. Naruto was complaining with a counselor after being told he couldn't do the lava wall anymore because he could just walk up it. So how'd your conversation with Mr. D go? Percy asked. Grover turned yellow before he replied, fine. Just great. So your career is still on track then? Grover looked at him nervously and said, see Chiron told you I want a searcher's license. Well, no. He just said you had big plans, you know, and that you needed credit for completing a keeper's assignment. So did you get it? Mr. D suspended judgment. He said I hadn't failed or succeeded with you yet, so our fates were still tied together. If you got a quest and I went along to protect you, and we both came back alive, then maybe he'd consider the job complete. Although he did say that Naruto had proven his worth, but that you were the one I originally had to protect, so you would be what determined everything. Wait, so Naruto was basically just along for the ride? Yep. Wow, I thought you were there to protect us both. Well, I was, but you were my original assignment. He came in around full break, remember? Yeah, but still I mean honestly it seems hard to remember life without him around. True, but that really doesn't matter for this. I need to protect you or something in order to get my license. But that isn't so bad. I mean, all I need to do is get a quest, right? Blah ha ha. He might as well have transferred me to stable cleaning duty. The chances of you getting a quest, and even if you did, why would you want me along? Of course I'd want you along. Grover stared glumly into the water. Yeah, but I have no skills. I mean, you're a good swordsman, and then there's Naruto has on a league of his own. What do I have? Personally, I think Yao'd be good at kickboxing. I can give you some lessons if you want. A voice said from their right. How long have you been here, Naruto? Since the searcher's license thingy. So you heard the entire thing about the quest? Yep, and I will help you with that, Grover, but if you want more help, then ask for it. Learn a combat skill or something. And be a little more confident in yourself, and lastly don't become so focused on one thing that it consumes you and eventually kills you. Grover and Percy looked at Naruto, surprised by his words. I'm not saying to give up on your dreams, but I am saying that it's not good to be obsessed with one thing like that. I knew a guy back where I'm from who almost died, and his would-be last words were about killing his brother, who killed his entire family, and I imagine if I had stayed any longer, I may have seen him go insane for the drive to get power to kill him. I'm not comparing you to him. Just telling you to be careful, alright? Grover and Percy were awestruck by Naruto's little speech. After a few minutes of silence, Grover said, yeah, alright Naruto. Naruto nodded before he stood up and did a backflip onto the water, saying well, see you guys later. leaving a somewhat inspired satyr and a mystified half-blood who was wondering how Naruto was standing on water. Naruto, as he rushed away from his friends, decided to try and explore a little more of the camp, specifically the area where he came in through. It took him about 5 minutes to reach the big pine tree on the hill by ninja jumping. He could see the remains of his car being cleaned up by a few street sweepers, mainly there was only glass left. He remembered the view of the area slightly from a few nights ago, so he decided to lean against the tree, or at least he tried to. As he sat down he felt a few electric shocks come from the tree, which he certainly wasn't expecting, so he stood with a small yelp. Unfortunately, Annabeth, who was down in the valley below, happened to see this exchange and take it completely the wrong way. "Hey, Naruto, what in Hades are you doing?" she yelled as she stomped up the hill. "Ack, what did I do?" he asked as he laid back on the ground in front of the tree. "Were you trying to get out of camp?" she yelled as she made it up to where he was laying. No, nothing like that, I just wanted to see the view from the hilltop and when I sat down the tree shocked me." "Why did you even try to do that? Don't you know that's Thalia's tree?" "Who's Thalia?" Naruto asked. Annabeth's eyes took a sorrowful look as she looked at the tree. "She's someone very special to me. She got turned into a tree by her father when she almost died protecting me and Luke from an army of monsters." "Oh, I'm sorry." "No, it's fine," she gave a slight smile as she said, "You know if you ask her, she'd probably let you sit there." "Alright, he'll try that. Sorry for startling you, Annabeth." "No problem, but you'd better be ready to fight later. I'm not losing tonight," she said with a confident smirk as she turned and started to go back down the hill. Naruto smiled at his new friend's antics and made his way back to the tree. When he reached it he said kind of awkwardly, "Sorry about earlier. Name's Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of unknown. If you let me sit here, I'll come up here every time I can and tell you what's going on, alright?" He honestly didn't expect any kind of reply, so he just sat down, without getting shocked this time, and began to tell Thalia's tree about himself. Minutes turned into hours, and soon enough it was getting dark. The conch horn blew signaling dinner. "Well, it's time for me to go, Thalia. He'll be back tomorrow, okay?" He got a slight shock on his backside, urging him to stand up. "Yeah, alright, I get it. He'll still be back tomorrow." He made quick time to the dining hall, sitting with the Athena cabin to discuss strategy and thank Annabeth for what she suggested earlier. Dinner passed by quickly and soon enough it was time for capture the flag. When the plates were cleared away, the conch horn sounded and all the campers stood at their tables. Campers yelled and cheered as Annabeth and 2 of her siblings ran into the pavilion carrying a silk banner. It was about 10 feet long, glistening gray, with a painting of a barn owl above an olive tree. From the opposite side of the pavilion, Clarice and her buddies ran in with another banner, of identical size, but gaudy red, painted with a bloody spear and a boar's head. And those would be the flags, Naruto thought out loud. The teams were announced. Athena had made an alliance with Apollo and Hermes, the 2 biggest cabins, as well as Naruto, who was a cabin by himself, or at least owner of the new Odeon. Apparently, privileges had been traded, shower times, chore schedules, the best slots for activities in order to win support. Ares had allied themselves with everybody else. Dionysus, Demeter, Aphrodite, and Hephaestus. From what Naruto had seen, Dionysus' kids were actually good athletes, but there were only 2 of them. Demeter's kids had the edge with nature skills and outdoor stuff, but they weren't very aggressive. Aphrodite's sons and daughters Naruto wasn't too worried about. They mostly sat out every activity and checked their reflections in the lake and did their hair and gossiped. Hephaestus' kids weren't pretty, and there were only 4 of them, but they were big and burly from working in the metal shop all day. They might be a problem, Naruto noted mentally. That, of course, left Ares' cabin. A dozen of the biggest, ugliest, meanest kids on Long Island, or anywhere else on the planet. Naruto smirked, "Oh, this will be fun." Tyron hammered his hoof on the marble. "Heroes," he announced. "You know the rules. The creek is the boundary line. The entire forest is fair game, except for Naruto's area. All magic items are allowed. The banner must be prominently displayed and have no more than 2 guards. Prisoners may be disarmed but may not be bound or gagged. No killing or maiming is allowed. I will serve as referee and battlefield medic. Arm yourselves." He spread his hands and the tables were suddenly covered with equipment. Helmets, bronze swords, spears, oxide shields coated in metal. Looking over at Percy, Naruto noticed that he was looking at everything in awe. He quickly redirected his attention toward Annabeth, who was calling his name. "So, when are you going to get ready?" she was asked. Naruto smirked and said, "Kai." A poof of smoke later, and Naruto was most definitely the most imposing figure there, so much so that everyone actually stopped what they were doing and looked at him. He was dressed in light samurai armor, which had a single orange stripe running through the breastplate. It went through a large Uzumaki swirl in the middle of the breastplate. The arm guards were black, with a single white stripe running along the length to the shoulders. There were no undersides to the guards though, so the arms had optimal movement. The leggings armor went down to the shins, but was only present on the outside of the leg. It too was painted black with a white stripe. The shin and foot guards were adjusted to allow for optimal movement, but were not visible. They were tucked under the pants he was wearing. He was wearing black shinobi sandals with iron reinforcements for added kicking power. He was wearing a samurai helm went down to the shoulders. The middle of the forehead supported the Uzumaki whirlpool, which was surrounded by what looked to be a cherry blossom tree. On the back of the breastplate, 9 orange tails stretched from his tailbone, 2 to wrap around his waist as belt, 2 stretched to his breasts, 2 to the undersides of his arms, 2 that wrapped around his collarbone, and 1 stretching the length of his spine. Connecting to the back of his helmet. His sword was connected to the foxtail belt on his left side. His right side sported a kunai and shuriken pouch in the armor, and on his back, he had a bow with a seal ingrained on it to summon arrows at will. The most intimidating thing though, was his mask. It was made of bronze, and had 6 whisker marks on the cheeks. The mask had openings for the eyes and mouth, but the mask turned Naruto's eyes red and slitted without relying on Kuri's chakra. The whisker marks seemed to glow with an ethereal redness. There was a small white goatee attached to the chin of the mask, giving Naruto the look of a wise but evil warrior. All this combined made everyone shiver and the opposing team to unanimously think one thought, we are so screwed. Does this work? He asked Annabeth in a demonic voice that his mask changed it to. Annabeth was too scared to answer the man in front of her, so she just nodded dumbly before she noticed something and said, we need you to wear some blue though, and could you turn the demonic thing off until we start? Naruto just touched the center of his armor, which turned the various white stripes on his armor blue, and said in a normal voice, no problem. Annabeth smiled and shouted, blue team. Forward. Everyone on the team cheered and shook their swords and followed Annabeth down the path to the south woods. The red team yelled taunts at them as they headed off toward the north, except at Naruto, who they were too afraid of. As Percy ran forward to talk to Annabeth, Naruto hung back to talk to Luke. Dude, where on earth did you get that? He asked. Naruto smirked and said, I made it myself. My clones have been working on it all week. Right, by the way, how many of those can you make? Well, if I use my own energy, anywhere from 750 to 1500, but if I use demon chakra, easily 10 to 20,000. Dude, you're a one-man army. And they all have your abilities. Yep. Well, I have a job for you now. You're going to be a frontline hitter. I want you to create 400 clones and have them spread out. You're going to punch through the front line and get their flag, if at all possible. I want 100 of your clones to hang back and help Percy with border patrol. Cool. By the way, I can give them all a slight amount of demon power so that they change their masks and can take up to 10 hits. You want me to do that? Luke smiled and said, God's yes. And remind me to never let you be on the other team. As soon as they entered the forest, Naruto stopped and said, everyone, stand back. Hajikage Bunshin no Jutsu. As 400 clones popped into existence, the original channeled a little demon chakra and said, you all know what to do. I want 50 archers and 50 swords on border patrol. The rest of you, divide as you please, but I would prefer 150 of each on the charge. Now then, he said as he tapped the center of his armor again and the conch horn blew, let's get to it. Before each Naruto disappeared. Annabeth and the rest of the campers weren't expecting that, but each and every one of them had a smirk on their face. Finally, Annabeth said, I think we just won. Few architects rise against. All the Narutos quickly passed the steam that divided the two sides and formed ranks, swordsmen in front, archers behind, with the original Naruto behind them all. Archers. At the ready. He called as each archer summoned a blunted arrow. Ready. Volley. Each Naruto fired a single shot, 150 in total, into the forest. Several arrows hit their marks, each marked by an easily distinguishable metallic noise. Ready swords. The original called as each Naruto pulled out an identical copy Raimei from their sheaths. Charge. And all of the Narutos let out a CHI and ran into the forest. Several clones met their enemies and tied them up with ninja wire. Naruto himself met with the flag guard and quickly had him tied to a tree with ninja wire. He quickly grabbed the flag and began running back to his side. Several clones had begun dispelling, telling Naruto that had managed to take down almost everyone. Oddly enough, Claris was missing, as were several of her fellow campers. He made good time with about 15 clones acting as bodyguards. Within 2 minutes, Head made it back to where Percy was fighting off those missing Ares campers. He looked worse for wear, more than likely he had been being soundly beaten before he stepped in the water. Naruto started hearing yelling from his right and left and was about to have his bodyguards deal with them, but stopped when he saw the blue helmets. Claris realized too late that she was going up against a ninja and tried to stop Naruto, but too late as Naruto splashed through the creek. Cheers broke out on Naruto's side as the banner changed from red with a boar and a spear to orange, with an Uzumaki swirl in the middle. The swirl became more defined and continued swirling, almost as if it were waiting for something. End music. Annabeth and Percy were talking about something. She probably noticed his healing ability with water or something. Chiron distracted his attention though as he came trotting over. Chiron started saying something to Naruto, but he wasn't listening. Something was wrong, there was something else there, something that didn't belong. His suspicions were proved correct when a howl ripped through the forest. Chiron shouted in ancient Greek, "Stand ready. My bow." While Naruto yelled to his remaining clones, "Men. Battle positions." Annabeth drew her sword as what made the noise came into view. On the rocks above Percy and Annabeth was a black hound the size of a rhino, with lava-red eyes and fangs like daggers. And it was staring right at Percy. So he thinks Hess top dog, eh? Well, let's make it clear. As Naruto said this, 9 tails of chakra rose behind him. He quickly let out a growl and a howl 10 times more powerful than the one that the dog in front of him. Many thought they should be scared, but when Naruto roared, a calming aura washed over them. The dog turned its attention to Naruto for a second and whimpered before it went back to growling at Percy. "Percy, run!" Annabeth yelled. She tried to step in front of him, but it was too fast and jumped over her and tore through Percy's armor. Naruto had enough as did his clones and Chiron apparently, as they all knocked arrows and fired into the thing at least 40 times each. When they stopped firing, the beast was a literal pincushion, as Naruto had bought time for his clones to get into position around the beast. Naruto dispelled his clones and walked up to the downed Percy with Chiron. "I Immortales," Annabeth said. "That's a hellhound from the fields of punishment. They're not supposed to." "Someone summoned it," Chiron said. "Someone inside the camp. I didn't detect any summonings during the match, which means that it was either summoned earlier today, or it has been here for a while." Everyone watched the hellhound disappear into shadow before Annabeth pointed out the obvious. "You're wounded, quick, Percy, get in the water." "I'm okay. Just do it, Perk," Naruto said, pinching the bridge of his mask's nose. Percy stepped into the water and the entire camp watched as his wounds began to close up. Several of the campers gasped, but Naruto just started laughing. Percy glared at Naruto and asked, "Something funny, Naruto?" Wiping a tear from his eye, Naruto said, "I'm just surprised it took Sir Seaweed this long." "Huh?" Percy said before he noticed everyone was staring above his head. When he looked up, the green, 3-tipped spear symbol of Poseidon was already beginning to fade. "Your father," Annabeth murmured. "This is really not good." "It is determined," Chiron announced. All around him, campers started kneeling, except for Naruto, including the Ares cabin, though they didn't look happy about it. "My father?" he asked, obviously completely bewildered. "Poseidon," said Chiron. "Earthshaker, Stormbringer, father of horses. Hail, Perseus Jackson, son of the sea god." "Well, as interesting as that may be, I think y'all be more surprised by this one," a voice said from the rocks where the hellhound came from. Everyone looked up and saw a young woman, about Naruto's age. Her eyes were silvery yellow, and she had auburn hair. Naruto only had one thought when he saw her, beautiful. He was interrupted by Chiron, who bowed and said, "Lady Artemis. What are you doing here?" Naruto blanched and hoped that she hadn't read his thoughts just then, but quickly bowed as did everyone else. "I'm actually here on the behalf of my father. My first duty is to announce the claiming of Naruto, and then the council would like to meet with him." She turned toward Naruto and said, "And yes, I was reading your thoughts, but I'm rather flattered that you think so highly of me. Perhaps we can get to know each other better over tea." "Sure, I'd like that, Artie," he said with a wink. He wasn't sure why he did that, but hoped to Zeus that she wasn't going to kill him. Artemis blushed before she pouted and crossed her arms and said, "Fine, but I get to call you Fishcake if you call me Artie, alright." "Sure," Naruto said begrudgingly. Chiron couldn't believe what he was hearing. First, the council wanted to talk with Naruto directly, but the fact that Artemis and him were flirting was just over his head. And then there was the fact that Artemis was blushing like a schoolgirl with a crush. What happened to the hating men thing? "Now then, Artie, weren't you about to say something about my father?" Artemis blushed before she said, "Alright then, Cake-kun. Camp Half-Blood, I would like to introduce you to." "And JK. I would like to introduce you to Naruto, son of Zeus, grandson of Hades, and great-grandson of Poseidon, sufferer of 1,000 pains, blessed by the 12 gods, and future god and heir to the throne of Olympus." "What?" Naruto and Artemis were both clearing their ears as the entire camp began to react in different ways. Chiron was slapping himself, Grover had fainted, Annabeth was just staring at Naruto, and Percy was smiling, knowing that he had at least one close family connection at camp. The flag that Naruto was holding changed, now on either side of the swirl was a lightning bolt, while the swirl was intersected by a green trident. In each corner of the banner, a drinking horn appeared, symbolizing Hades. Well, now that that's been taken care of, Naruto and I have a meeting to attend. Don't worry Chiron, I'll have him back by daybreak. Artemis hopped down from where she was standing and grabbed Naruto's arm before they disappeared in a shroud of twinkling stars. When Naruto opened his eyes, he found himself standing on the corner of 34th and 6th Ave in Manhattan, better known as where the Empire State Building was located. "Come on Cake-kun," Artemis said as she dragged him through a small crowd of people to the doors of the building. Naruto grumbled but was dragged along nonetheless. Naruto had avoided this place ever since he came here the first time when he was getting acquainted with the city. The lobby was always stuffed and people were trying to sell him things the entire time. By the time he got to the viewing deck, an hour and a half had passed and then he was basically pushed around the area till he got back to the elevator. He didn't even get a souvenir. When Artemis pushed through the doors though, he was shocked to find the area basically empty. Walking up to the desk, Artemis said, "Evening Bob, how's it going?" "Buzz off," he said without even looking up from his book. Artemis sighed and said, "This is why I hate men. Bob, would you prefer to be turned into an antelope or a deer?" Bob looked up from his book wide-eyed and quickly realized who he was talking to. "Hello Lady Artemis. I'm sorry for my actions but why are you here? Don't you bosses usually take the express?" "Yes, but this time, we have a guest and Dad wanted me to show him around." Oh? And wo's the big wig who gets the tour?" Naruto stepped up and said, "Name's Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, nice to meet you." Bob shook Naruto's offered hand before paling and saying, "Wait a minute, did you say Uzumaki? As in, Kushina Uzumaki, second wife of Zeus?" "Yep, that's my mom." Bob just paled even more and gave Naruto a small key card before he crumpled into his desk, crying something about murder and him so dead. Naruto's sweat dropped and said thank you before rushing off to where Artemis was standing, next to one of the office elevators. "So what do I do now?" Naruto asked. "Just put that card into the security slot," Artemis said. So he did as he was told, and as the card disappeared, a new button labeled 600 appeared. Naruto pressed it and the elevator lurched into motion. "It'll Be" by Edwin McCain started playing, which made it a little awkward in the elevator. "So your guy's security guard is named Bob?" "Yep." "Cool." After what seemed like an eternity, the elevator dinged and the doors slid open. He stepped out onto a narrow stone walkway which seemed to be hovering in the air. Below them was Manhattan, from the height of an airplane. In front of them were white marble steps wound up the spine of a cloud into the sky. Following the stairway to its end, there rose the decapitated peak of a mountain, its summit covered with snow. Clinging to the mountainside were dozens of multi-leveled palaces, a city of mansions, all with white columned porticos, gilded terraces, and bronze braziers glowing with 1,000 fires. Roads wound crazily up to the peak, where the largest palace gleamed against the snow. Precariously perched gardens bloomed with olive trees and rose bushes. Naruto could make out an open-air market filled with colorful tents, a stone amphitheater built on one side of the mountain, a hippodrome and a coliseum on the other. It was an ancient Greek city, except it wasn't in ruins. It was new and clean and colorful, the way Athens must look 2,500 years ago. Wow was the only thing that Naruto could say. Naruto passed through Olympus in a daze. Things were being sold and bought, lesser gods laughed and drank wine, and muses were playing next to fountains or in parks. Whenever Naruto passed anyone though, they would stop what they were doing and bow, which Naruto didn't particularly like but accepted it as necessary. He saw a few things he would have liked to look at in some stalls, but he didn't have time to stop, as was evident by Artemis pulling him by his ear. "Oh wow," Naruto yelled as he was dragged to the palace. "Well, if you want to come back here later and get something, be my guest. But right now, we have something more important to deal with." Naruto pouted and said, "You're no fun Artie." Artemis smiled and said, "Only when I need to be Cake-kun." They quickly entered a large courtyard where Artemis stopped and said, "Well, I have to go now. Just go through the big doors in a minute. After that, it'll help you get back to camp." She leaned in and gave Naruto a peck on the cheek before she giggled and ran off. Naruto was seriously stupefied and blushing like a tomato. Wasn't she supposed to be a man-hater or something? And why was she flirting with him so much? Not that he minded, of course, she was actually really beautiful. Naruto shook himself clear of his thoughts and compassed himself to meet with the council and his father. As he approached the great doors, he whispered to himself, "Okay, I can do this," before he took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The first thing he noticed when he entered was that the room was structured like the cabins were a camp. There were 12 seats for the 12 high Olympian gods, formed in a U-shape. All of the seats were filled, and there was a large flat-screen TV hanging between the seats in the middle. The weirdest thing was that all the gods were around 10 feet tall, and each chair had different attributes, as did their occupants. Poseidon looked like a beachgoer, Ares was wearing a standard US Army uniform, and Zeus was wearing a pinstripe suit. Naruto sighed and went to the middle of the U, standing directly in front of his father, whom he bowed to slightly and said, "Lord Zeus." Zeus seemed saddened by what he said, and stepping down from his chair, said, "Why do you not address me as your father? Do you feel hatred toward me for what I did?" He asked the last part softly and just barely above a whisper, but the hall they were in amplified it. Naruto gave a genuine smile and said, "No, I just wanted to get you out of your chair," before he disappeared and reappeared in front of Zeus and shoved a chakra-enhanced punch into his stomach, which caused all the gods to flinch and threw the massive Zeus back into his chair with a loud thud. "That was for sealing a demon into me and abandoning me. I would do more, but I'm sure that Ka-san already has, so I'll let it slide." All of the gods except for Zeus started laughing at that. Zeus sat up and started rubbing the back of his head and holding his stomach, trying to regain his breath. While he was doing this, he turned toward Poseidon and said, "Hey Gramps. How's it going?" Poseidon looked toward his great-grandchild and said, "Much better now that you did that. Why aren't you afraid of us?" Naruto took on a sad smile and said, "Well, you guys aren't any more intimidating than the fox I have sealed in my gut, so I just see past the serious act." Something flickered on the TV, and a male voice said, "Oh, did I miss the part where Zeus got his ass kicked?" Poseidon laughed and said, yes you did brother." "Ah, damn it, at least tell me that Hephaestus was recording that." "I was." The grizzly blacksmith yelled. "Good. Hephaestus, send me a copy." "Well, I'm guessing that you are my grandfather, right?" Naruto said to the TV. "Yep, we can get introduced later. Right now, I think someone else wants to talk with you," Hades said as he stepped to the side to show a woman with red hair and blue eyes. "Naruto." "Mom?" She looked like she was about to start crying and said, "Naruto. Oh, you have no idea how glad I am to see you." Naruto was faring no better. "Same here mom, but why are you in the underworld?" Her face steeled at that your father and grandfather negotiated for those that tortured you to be sent to Tartarus for a few months. I've been down here torturing them. He'll probably go back in a week or so though. Naruto nodded in understanding. "So how'd you and dad convince Hera to allow you to marry him?" Hera spoke up and said, "We came to an agreement. Kushina managed to keep him in line back in that world, so I agreed to allow the marriage, as long as she kept him in line. And has been being good, haven't you dear?" Kushina said with a little ki that leaked through the TV. Zeus turned white and nodded furiously. "Good. Anyways, honey, at the end of the summer, I want you to come and live with us on Olympus, alright?" Naruto smiled and said, "Of course, I'd love to. By the way, have you met a woman named Sally Jackson?" "Yes, I have, and we spent a few hours gossiping about you and Percy." "She's fine, don't worry. But, I think it's about time that you got this meeting underway." Naruto sniffled a bit and said, "Love you mom." "Love you too, now here's your grandfather. Take care Naruto." Naruto stepped back from the TV and stood back in the middle of the room. "Right," Zeus said as he stood, "we are here in regards to the position of Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, as well as to assign him his duty for the year. Naruto Uzumaki, as a son of Zeus and descendant of all of the big three, you fall under the jurisdiction of a document created at the end of the Titan War that has never been used. It states that you are to automatically become a god upon your request or death and that you are automatically the heir to the throne of Olympus. This means two things. The first is that in the event of my death or otherwise incapacitation, you are to take command of the council and the defense of Olympus. This puts you automatically at the rank of the big three. Secondly, should any of the high gods request your help, you are required to assist unless your assistance does not comply with your morals, in which case you have full right to prevent the action from being carried out at all. In addition, in the event of a siege or anything else, and none of the higher gods are available, you are placed in charge of the defense of the city, as well as the city we are located in. In addition, you are allowed to choose a godly duty to perform until you are required to take the helm of Olympus. Poseidon, you have the floor," Zeus said as he sat back down. Poseidon stood and cleared his throat as he took out a scroll from his pocket. "In the interests of time, I would like first inform you that you do not need to accept this if you do not want to. As heir to the throne, your duties, including those mentioned by Zeus, are command of the armies of Olympus, command of the army of the sea, and command of the army of the dead, unless otherwise directed by myself, Lord Zeus, or Lord Hades. Do you accept these duties?" Naruto was in a state of semi-shock. Not only was he going to become a god, but he was in command of all the armies of the Olympian gods, and was actually in command of any of the other gods that would be there if there was a war. He quickly recomposed himself and gave a quick "I do." Poseidon nodded and continued, as heir to the throne, you will be placed in charge of other duties as well, including finances, deals with gods from other realms, and army recruitment and supply. Do you accept these duties? I do. Right blah blah blah. Blah blah blah. Wow, who did we have write this again? Half of this stuff is junk. Ah, here we are. Right, in order to continue, you need to display that you are the rightful heir of Olympus. You must first prove your lineage by displaying a power from all 5 elements, and then you must defeat one of the high gods in combat. Do you accept the challenge? I do. This time it was Zeus to speak. Naruto, you don't need to do this, you know. Naruto smiled. I know, Dad, but I always dreamed of proving myself to you, and now that I have that chance, I'm not going to let it go. Zeus smiled slightly. Very well, you must demonstrate your ability to use fire, water, earth, lightning, and if possible, wind, without the use of other sources. Jutsu are allowed, but natural control of the element is best. Naruto nodded. Can I use implements that will have no effect on the element? Zeus nodded again. So what do you need? Naruto's face took a questioning look for a second before he said, I need a target for archery, some water, my bow, some earth, and that's it. Zeus smiled and nodded before he clapped, and all the necessary materials appeared in the middle of the room. The first thing that Naruto did was to set up the target and aim his bow. Many were curious as to what this would show, but their questions were quickly answered when the arrow was released, as when it did it caught alight with black fire and exploded when it hit the target, completely eradicating it from existence. Naruto had discovered how to do that on accident when he was practicing his archery from his watchtower at night. Next he moved over to the earth. He focused on the earth's immobility and stubbornness, making himself just as solid as possible. He put a finger on top of the earth. For a second nothing happened, but then the block started to shake and split apart. After a few seconds, the block split and the chamber started shaking. Poseidon took care of it though, with a simple stamp of his trident. Naruto smiled and moved on to the water. Inside though, he was jumping for joy, as he hadn't ever attempted that before and was just winging it. He looked down at the pool of water before him and began to concentrate on it. He began to think about what Haku did back on the bridge, how cold his demeanor seemed, and yet how relaxed his stance was. Sure enough, as he focused on these qualities, the ice began to freeze. After a few minutes, the water was completely frozen. Naruto smiled again. He had finished the 2 elements that he had no idea how to control, and was now left with the base of his upgrade of the Hirshin and his most powerful element. Naruto smirked as he began the process for the Seal-less Hirshin. He channeled electricity through his body, and within seconds the room was cleared and he was back in the middle of the room. That was the base of the new Hirshin. It channels electricity through the body to make it basically like a level 1 Hirshin, but it doesn't use seals. Zeus chuckled at his son's ingenuity. Very good, but what about wind? He asked. Naruto smirked as the wind picked up around him. At first, no one could see anything, but they began to feel it as the wind began to circulate. Everyone was forced to blink at the intensity, but when they opened their eyes, they saw a fully fledged tornado surrounding Naruto. Zeus. Can you stop this? Poseidon shouted at his brother. No. His power with this element is twice as strong as mine. Hess probably at the same level as the wind gods. When he said that, 9 more tornadoes formed behind Naruto and connected with the main one. Scratch that. Hess as powerful as all of them combined. Zeus yelled. After a few minutes the wind began to die down, revealing a smirking Naruto with his arms crossed over his chest. What, too much for you? He asked as all the gods tried to fix their hair, though honestly Aphrodite was the only one who was really focused on that. Zeus straightened as he fixed his suit and said, well, I think that takes care of that test. Who would you like to fight? Naruto thought about it for a second before he replied, Ares, I will fight you. The council was shocked. I mean, sure, the kid was powerful, but strong enough to take on the war god. You sure about that, kid? Ares said smirking. Yes, Naruto replied. Lord Zeus, if I may. His decision has been made, Poseidon. Let's see what he has planned. Ares hopped down from his throne and went to normal size, wearing Greek armor and carrying a sword and shield. Make your move, brat. He hissed as he got into battle position. Naruto turned around and said, hey dad, all I have to do is beat him, right? Zeus nodded. And there aren't any rules as to how I beat him. Zeus shook his head and then realized what his son was going to do. You're going to use that technique, aren't you? Naruto nodded and said, well, it is the guy's weakness. I'll deal with the repercussions of my actions by myself, but I do suggest you cover your eyes. I figured out how to improve it so that it takes the visage of whoever it is to any person. Alright, just get it over with. Zeus said while covering his eyes. Naruto smirked and called out, Taj Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 100 Narutos appeared surrounding Ares. So you can only fight me when you have strength in numbers. Peh, you're pathetic. All of the clones dispelled to show Naruto with his hair covering his eyes. What you call me? He asked in a fake light tone. I said you're pathetic, brat. Naruto grabbed the hilt of his sword and said, call me pathetic one more time. You're pathetic. He was interrupted by Naruto's sword going through both of his lungs. Naruto withdrew his sword and golden ichor began gushing out of the wound. I was going to make this easy on you, Ares, and somewhat funny. But now you've pissed me off. As he said this, the wind began to swirl around his feet, creating another small tornado. Naruto threw his sword into the air and called out, be swift. Raime no Shio. There was a bright flash, and the katana came down as an adachi, twice the length of the original katana. Naruto caught it and said, Sendotu. Sentatsumaki no Tsudareki. 3 tornadoes appeared surrounding the still coughing god, and Naruto disappeared. A few seconds later, Naruto reappeared and sheathed his sword, which caused the tornadoes to dissipate, leaving a severely cut and unconscious Ares in their wake. Not only did Naruto defeat the god of war, he did it in less than a minute. The council all earned one thing that day, don't piss of Naruto Uzumaki. Ares is unable to fight. The victor is Naruto Uzumaki. Zeus announced. The entire council stood and began clapping, including Aphrodite who, despite a relationship with Ares, wanted him knocked down a peg or two. Zeus was smiling proudly, and Artemis was blushing again because Naruto caught her eye and winked, though now Naruto could tell that it was almost forced. Alright, Poseidon said, standing again, a few more things to take care of. First, as the heir to Olympus, you are allowed to take 3 wives of mortal or immortal blood. Naruto started blushing while Artemis started to scowl, but quickly contained it. It was previously arranged so that Artemis would be one of the wives of the heir if one ever appeared. Do you accept her hand? Naruto looked over at Artemis, who seemed to be looking at him almost pleadingly. Right then he made his decision. No, I do not. The majority of the council, including Artemis herself, was shocked at what he said. Why not? Am I unfair? Artemis asked, rising from her chair. No, milady, however I would never force something upon someone that they don't want or had no choice in. Zeus cringed at that, and Artemis continued, but much less angry now, how could you tell? Naruto smiled sadly, your eyes. I know those eyes all too well from looking in the mirror every day. He turned back to Poseidon and said, I respectfully decline and request that that particular part of the document be removed under my future authority. Although I will consider the multiple marriage section, but only if my future wife is okay with it. Poseidon smiled and said, alright, hereforward Artemis is removed from the document and given full free jurisdiction over who she marries under any circumstance. Should there be another heir at some point, she will no longer be required to marry. Also, the multiple marriage section is temporarily suspended and judgment will be passed on a later date in regards to the matter. Thunder boomed and Artemis gave a genuine smile to Naruto. Next we need to know what you will eventually be god of. We have the position of. They'll take the position of negotiator and mediator as well as god of the heavenly winds. Do we even have that position available? Hades asked. Zeus was busily flipping through a book and said, yes, in fact, we do, or at least for the heavenly wind god part. Why did you say mediator? Well, you guys do bicker like schoolgirls according to the old stories. Naruto said, scratching the back of his head while all the gods blushed and laughed sheepishly, well, except for Ares, who was still bleeding on the floor. Well then, Zeus said, you now have the position. Now then, in order to take the position, all of the gods must vote. A majority of 2/3 is required. Hermes, you start. The kid's alright and pretty fast too. I vote yes. Zeus nodded. Apollo. The kid helped out my little sis, how can I say no? In fact, I won't mind if he made a pass at her. Both Artemis and Naruto blushed, with the former throwing a shoe at his head. Alright then, Ares is preoccupied, so that means that Athena is up next. You proved yourself in battle against Ares and showed some kind of plan that you didn't follow through on, but nonetheless a plan. I approve. Zeus nodded. Aphrodite. Well, he may not be much on the eyes now, but I can tell he will be soon. I approve. Alright then, Artemis. After you showed us what he went through, I was already going to say yes. Has been through too much. But that fact that his heart remained pure and that he released me from that infernal document, I vote yes, and maybe, just maybe, it'll give him a shot. She thought the last part. Okay then, Dionysus. The kid's interesting and could probably match me in a drinking contest. I approve. Alright, but remember you're still on probation. Demeter. Nah, don't know the kid well enough. Abstain. Hephaestus. The kid forged the armor Hess wearing himself. Of course I approve. Para, my dear. Usually I hate your affairs, but if I accepted Kushina I suppose that I can accept her son, and he seems to value family. Besides, you put him through something worse than I could ever devise and came out sane. I approve. Wow, did not expect that. Alright, Poseidon. That's my great-grandchild and one of my son's closest friends. Of course I approve. Right, even though it's not necessary, Hades. Ashina would kill me if I said no, and Hess a good kid. I approve. Alright then, the vote passes with 10 votes for and 2 abstentions. Now then, to finalize this, repeat after me. I will uphold the values of Olympus and the gods, and will be a guiding force to humanity in my life, and a leader of Olympus after my death. I vow to never turn my back on those who need me, and will stay true to my family. So swear I, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, on the river Styx. Naruto repeated all of that, and when he finished, thunder boomed. Congratulations, Lord Uzumaki, Lord of Olympus. All rise. Zeus' voice boomed through the hall, and the meeting was over. All of the Olympians rose except for Poseidon and Zeus, as well as Artemis, who stayed behind to keep her word to Naruto and take him back to camp. Naruto. Zeus started. First, I would like to say sorry for the Camaro, and I got you a new one that's in your garage. Next, I have your orders. A few months ago, my lightning bolt was stolen. I originally would have blamed Poseidon, but because we worked together to bring you to this world, we maintained contact. What we know is that neither Poseidon nor Hades stole it. In order to coax out the thief, we have begun fighting, or so the other gods believe. In reality, we've been arguing over random stuff like who has the best palace. We know that the thief is from that camp. Your job is twofold. Primarily, you're to find my bolt. Your secondary objective is to find the traitor. Do you have any questions? No, not about that at least. Although I am curious as to how you died and lived in the other world. Zeus sighed. Only the high gods can go there. We have an age-old agreement with the gods of that world that allows them to come to this world and become mortal, and likewise for us in their world. I'm as abject in that world, meaning that I left here a few years after a traumatic event for me, and I took a mortal vacation there. I lost my godly powers, but found your mother. Oh, alright, that makes sense, I think. Don't worry too much about it. It'll make more sense later. Cool, so see you later, Dad. Yep, see ya. With that, the somewhat awkward conversation ended and Naruto walked over to Artemis. Well, that was interesting. Yeah, Hess like that sometimes, so ready to go. Yep. But that Naruto took her hand and they disappeared. Barry appeared in the forest outside of Naruto's area. Well, here you are. You know, I won't mind if I got to learn more about you at some point. Sure, maybe after camp is done. Alright, I'm sure I'll see you on Olympus. Can I still call you Artie? Only if I can call you Fishcake or Cake-kun. Alright, just don't tell anyone. Artemis giggled a bit at that. Hey Artie, want to help me with a prank? Artemis' eyes gained a mischievous glint. Who are we pranking? A few minutes later, they teleported in front of Chiron, who had stayed up fretting about having two big 3 children appear at camp. When they appeared, they were locked in an embrace that seemed a lot like a married couple's. What are you doing? Chiron yelled. They turned toward the centaur and said in unison, what? I can't hug my fiancé. Chiron started to stutter and then fainted on his couch, leaving a laughing god and half-god in his wake. Naruto woke up early the morning after his meeting with the council and his and Artie's prank on Chiron. Artie of course summoned a camera to take pictures of the horseman's face so that they could laugh at it later or use it as blackmail. Of course, if both of them weren't technically immortal, Naruto had no doubt that both of them probably would have died. When they got to his cabin, Artie went as far as to say that was her best experience with a man, and Naruto had replied by saying, well, hopefully there will be more to come. As he started his morning jog, he noticed several things were different since last night. First of all, there was a lot more wildlife in Naruto's little area of the forest. Naruto suspected that it was due to Artie's presence, and so elected to give her a special offering tonight at dinner. Another interesting thing was that his little stream had turned into a small river, with rapids to boot. That one, he accredited Poseidon with, and while doing his jog, Naruto noticed that the climate changed with his mood. For example, if he stubbed his toe, there was a brief thundering in the distance. If he found something that was cute or amusing, the sun got a little brighter. He guessed that was either due to a blessing from his father or due to his new status as guardian of the heavenly winds and mediator of Olympus. Whatever the case, Naruto greatly enjoyed it. Then, as he finished his run, the lights in the Poseidon cabin flickered on. Naruto quickly changed out of his workout clothes and started walking down his little path to the main camp. He already had his day planned out. First, he was going to head by the Poseidon cabin and check on Percy. Then, he was going to give him some tutoring lessons and swordplay, probably with Luke's help. Speaking of Luke, Naruto had a bad feeling about him. He would have to keep an eye on his fellow blonde. Of course, Naruto couldn't find Percy and so went to the swordsman training area to see Luke and Percy already training. Percy seemed to be adept with his sword, Riptide, so it looked like Luke was trying to determine what would be good for his other hand, and right now it looked like he was trying out using torches. You're going to need all the training you can get, now let's try that Viper beheading strike again. 50 more repetitions. Naruto decided to just watch this particular training exercise, he wasn't going to interfere with the training Perk was going through just so he could be teaching. Naruto saw Percy again when he went to Greek class in the morning, though Naruto just sat back and observed, mainly because he found that when he was made into a demi-deity, he also managed to get a complete understanding of the language. In the afternoon, Naruto pulled Percy from the climbing class after requesting to teach him the basic principles of unarmed combat. He started out with a few basic exercises and quickly determined that Percy would be best with minimal teaching in any given style. Like the sea, he was just too unpredictable to give a certain style to. Honestly, he thought Percy was similar to himself in that respect, best if just left to his own devices in battle. Then, about an hour before dinner, he visited Thalia and went over his day. He got shocked again when he said that they were brother and sister, and again when he told her tree that he was made into a demi-deity. He promised that he would try and find a way to get Thalia out of her tree, which was replied to with a gentle shock to his cheek, which Naruto took as a little kiss from his sister for saying as much. Since then, he just went over tales from his old world and what his day was like and asked on occasion what her day was like, which got him a light shock on the arm like a playful slap, which made Naruto laugh. This continued for a few days, though he had to console Percy after some jerk at the camp decided to leave the New York Daily News in his doorway. Percy felt really downtrodden after that, but Naruto pointed out that they forgot that it was his car and that he even existed. They'd probably wanted to forget all about that poker game, though his friends and himself still couldn't get their stuff back from his lawyers. Speaking of which, Naruto got a few Iris messages from Hephaestus about using some of his mortal-worthy inventions and selling them from Naruto's store. Naruto set it up so that the new Favero's tablet would be sold exclusively from the small shop. It quickly became a hit with its HD Retina display and processing capability, so much so in fact that Naruto had to open a new store and had started getting offers from Apple to use the processing software in exchange for setting up stores on the West Coast. Of course, all good things must come to an end. The night after the paper incident, Naruto was visited by none other than Artie, who came with a message from the council. So you're saying that Perk will be issued a quest tomorrow and that I have to find a way to make myself a part of it? Yep, pretty much. Hopefully you guys will be able to find the bolt by the solstice, or the big three will have their bluff called by whoever is doing this and probably try to stir up dissent with the lower gods. Do you have any questions? Yeah, just one. If push came to shove, could I use the bolt? I mean, without the blow up the world feature. Thunder boomed and both Artie and Naruto listened. Dad says okay, just make sure not to throw it or to channel lightning nature into it, though he would rather you not have to use it at all, and so would I. Well, he'll try not to use it, but it may be necessary at some point. So my objectives are to find the bolt, get it back by the solstice, and to punish the thief. Anything else? Yeah, Poseidon wants you to watch out for Percy and to make sure he gets home safe. That I didn't even need to be told. I always look out for my friends and family, those that are precious to me, and I consider you to be one of my precious people. He whispered. Artie blushed a little when she heard that before she shook herself out of it. Two could play at that game, oh that's so sweet. Cake-kun has a little crush on me. Anyways, I have to get back to Olympus to help Poseidon and Zeus keep up the charade. See you later, Cake-kun. Oh, and don't destroy anything. She said with a wink before she disappeared in what seemed to be a shower of shooting stars, leaving a blushing and stuttering Naruto in her wake. When he finally recovered, he finally understood why Shikamaru called women troublesome and decided to go to bed. The next morning, he would have followed his usual routine, but the fates had other plans. Of course his father had decided it was time for the quest to begin. Though Naruto's area was untouched, there was a storm heading toward camp. Time to go then, eh pops? Thunder rumbled in the distance. Naruto had picked up this annoying tick when it came to his father from living in New York. Whenever he was talking about his dad now, he wouldn't say dad or father, but instead pops, just because it sounded better and was less formal. Of course, this made Zeus feel old and really didn't like it that much, which just made his son do it more, and some of his other children started calling him that too, or at least according to Artie. Naruto made his way to cabin 3 to see Percy following Grover with a worried look on his face. Hey Perk, where you going? Heading to the big house, evidently Mr. D wants to see me. Well, mind if I tag along? Percy looked at Grover, who shook his head sadly. No, I don't think so. Dionysus was very clear that he only wanted Percy for this meeting. Sorry, Naruto. Naruto frowned. Well, I think I'll make an exception for me, and besides, I can't let my best friends go up against the gods alone, now can I? Percy and Grover smiled a little at his words, despite the overly serious situation. "Alright, your funeral man," Grover said, chuckling. The storm was getting bigger and closer as it traveled over Long Island Sound. "Think we'll need an umbrella?" Percy asked jokingly. "No," Grover replied in all seriousness, "it never rains here unless we want it to." "Yeah, sure, or someone up top wants it to rain here," Naruto supplied, which made Grover turn a little pale and confused Percy, who didn't really know what Naruto was talking about. Still, even Percy noticed that everybody, except for Naruto who seemed relaxed, was tenser than usual. The trio made quick time to the big house, where they saw Chiron and Dionysus sitting on the porch playing pinochle with two invisible opponents. Well, our little celebrity finally decides to grace us with his presence," Mr. D said without looking up. "I didn't know that you thought so highly of me, Dionysus," Naruto said as he kept advancing toward the game, prompting the other two to do the same. Mr. D looked up from his card for a minute and gave Naruto a mock salute. "Lord Naruto, why am I not surprised to see you? Did father assign you to babysit the brats?" Naruto, not noticing the odd looks from his friends and Chiron, replied, "Well, in a manner of speaking, yes. I'm sure you've been briefed on the situation, Lord Dionysus." Yes. Father made your job here and to the other gods clear after Ares recovered. As camp director I was told exactly what you would be doing for him. Rest assured, no one else knows as of yet except for Artemis, who seems to be quite fond of you by the way. I think this is the first time in history that she said something about a boy other than that she wanted to turn them into ashes or an antelope or something." Chiron immediately knew what he was talking about and started blushing madly, while Naruto just started laughing. "Yep, that's arty for you. By the way, do you want something you can blackmail Chiron with?" Mr. D's eyebrows rose. "You actually have something on him? Hermes and I have been trying for centuries to get blackmail on the guy." "Yeah, but y'all have to talk to Artie about it. If she okays it, then you and Hermes owe me a favor, alright?" Dionysus nodded his head, which made Chiron pale a little. Grover was thoroughly confused by the conversation, and Percy was getting irritated about getting left out of the loop. "Hey, someone mind telling me what's going on here?" Percy yelled. "Quiet mortal, don't interrupt two gods when they're speaking." Mr. D snapped as his chair began to be encased in grapevines. Sorry, but what's the other god?" Percy asked nervously, hoping that he wasn't about to be strangled by a grapevine. Mr. D turned back to Naruto and placed his face firmly in the palm of his hand. "You forgot to tell them, didn't you?" Naruto scratched the back of his head nervously. "Well, I've had a lot going on, and..." "Oh please, you were just too busy flirting with Artemis." Turning away from a now blushing Naruto, he looked at Percy and Grover again, and both just looked confused. "Well then, allow me to introduce Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of Zeus, grandson of Hades, and great-grandson of Poseidon, god of the heavenly winds, mediator of Olympus, heir to the throne of Olympus, and grand general of the Olympian army." Chiron just looked at Naruto with his mouth agape. Grover was wondering how he became a god and was flirting with Artemis, and Percy had let out an audible gasp before feeling a little better about himself, in hoping that he had at least one god on his side. Of course, there was another gasp heard on the porch that was distinctively female that Naruto and Chiron picked up on, but didn't say anything about it, seeing as how it had been covered up by Percy's. "So you're telling me that Naruto is a god?" Percy asked a little timidly. Naruto sighed. "I'm not exactly a god yet, Perk. I prefer the term demi-deity, seeing as I'm more on the other side of the god scale now than the human one. I'll only become a god when I want to become one, or when I die. Pretty simple." "And when did this happen?" "A few days ago, when Artie took me to Olympus." "Well, that explains the fiancé thing," Chiron whispered, but Dionysus heard him. "Fiancé thing?" Dionysus asked with raised eyebrows. "Ask Artie. I would tell you, but you have a meeting to go to soon, am I right? Besides, she's a better storyteller than I am, or at least did hope so, considering her brother," Naruto said quietly. "Ah yes, quite right. I have to talk with Peter Johnson before I go though." "It's Percy Jackson," Sir Percy hissed. The floor shook a little as Dionysus took on an angry look. "Do not expect me to know you, mortal, just because old Barnacle Beard is your father." Lightning streaked through the clouds and thunder shook the windows, prompting Dionysus to a talking hand motion as he said, "Blah, blah, blah." Chiron feigned interest in his pinochle cards. Grover cowered by the railing, his hooves clopping back and forth, while Naruto looked amused and Percy was a little freaked out, but didn't let it show. "If I had my way," Dionysus said, "I would cause your molecules to erupt in flames. We'd sweep up the ashes and be done with a lot of trouble. But Chiron seems to feel this would be against my mission at this cursed camp. To keep you little brat safe from harm." "Well, you do realize that spontaneous combustion is a form of harm, right Dionysus?" Naruto asked as an image of the Nine Tails appeared behind him. Well, he won't feel anything, Dionysus said weakly, but I suppose you're right, maybe I should turn him into a dolphin instead. The image in Naruto's glare became more defined, but then again, maybe I shouldn't. The nine tails dispersed, and Naruto smiled. Glad you saw reason, Dionysus. Naruto said in an overly happy voice which caused Dionysus to sigh. He and the other gods learned one thing a few nights ago. Don't piss off Naruto. Uzumaki, the demi-deity, had enough power to defeat Ares when he was pissed, for crying out loud. Regardless, your only other option is to go on a quest. Now, I have an emergency meeting to go to on Olympus. If you're still here by the time I'm back, I will turn you into an Atlantic botanist and send you back to your father, despite any other god's protests. And Perseus Jackson, if you're at all smart, you'll see that's a much more sensible choice than what Chiron feels you must do. Dionysus picked up a playing card, twisted it, and it became a security pass. He snapped his fingers and disappeared, leaving only the smell of fresh pressed grapes behind. Chiron gave a tired smile to Percy and said, "Please sit, Percy, and you too, Grover. Naruto, you can as well." They did, and as they sat down, Chiron laid his cards on the table, which prompted Naruto to whistle at the high hand. "Tell me, Percy, what did you make of the Hellhound?" Percy shuddered at the name before he responded, "It scared me. If you and Naruto hadn't shot it, it'd probably be dead." Chiron's eyes took on a dark look. "You'll meet worse, Percy. Far worse before you're done." "Done with what?" "Your quest, of course. Will you accept it?" Percy looked at Grover, who was crossing his fingers, then at Naruto, who was using his control over wind to play with a leaf. Sir, you haven't told me what it is yet." "Well, that's the hard part, the details." Thunder rumbled across the valley. The storm clouds had now reached the edge of the beach. As far as the eye could see, the sea and the sky were boiling together. Poseidon and Zeus, they're fighting over something valuable, something that was stolen, aren't they? Chiron and Grover exchanged looks while Naruto stopped playing with his leaf and started paying attention to the conversation. "How did you know about that?" Naruto asked with an edge to his voice. Percy turned a little pink, but said, "The weather since Christmas has been weird, like the sea and the sky are fighting. Then I talked to Annabeth and she'd overheard something about a theft. And I've also been having these dreams." "I knew it," Grover said excitedly. "Hush, Satyr," Chiron commanded as Naruto started laughing. "Seriously, it's kinda funny. But it's his quest. It must be. Only the Oracle can determine, but nevertheless, Percy, you are correct. Your father and Zeus are having their worst quarrel in centuries. And, yes, they are fighting over something that was stolen. A lightning bolt, to be precise." "The what?" "Don't mistake me, I'm not talking about a tinfoil-covered zigzag that you might find in a second-grade play. I'm talking about a 2-foot-long cylinder of high-grade celestial bronze, capped at each end with god-level explosives." "Oh." Yeah, Naruto interjected after getting over his giggles, "It's my dad's master bolt. You know, symbol of his power, first weapon forged in the war against the Titans by the Cyclops base, for all other lightning bolts has enough power to make a hydrogen bomb look like a firecracker, and somebody stole it." "By who?" "By whom?" Percy. This caused Naruto to start laughing again. "Seriously, Chiron was on a roll today. And Zeus thinks that you stole it." "What?" "But I didn't." "Patience and listen, child," Chiron said, "Zeus has good reason to be suspicious. The forges of the Cyclops are under the ocean, which gives Poseidon some influence over the makers of his brother's lightning. Zeus believes Poseidon has taken the Master Bolt and is now secretly having the Cyclops build an arsenal of illegal copies, which might be used to topple Zeus from his throne. The only thing Zeus wasn't sure about was which hero Poseidon used to steal the bolt. Now Poseidon has openly claimed you as his son. You were in New York over the winter holidays. You could easily have snuck into Olympus. Zeus believes he has found his thief. But I've never even been to Olympus. Zeus is crazy." Percy, we don't use the C word to describe the Lord of the Sky," Grover said. "Well, Dad isn't crazy, more paranoid than anything else. I mean, come on, Poseidon did try and overthrow him before. You know, that time where he and a few other gods trapped him in a golden net until he promised to be a better ruler. Right, and let me guess, Zeus has harbored a grudge against my dad ever since, right?" "Yep, pretty much." "Great. Percy, think about it," Grover said, "if you were Zeus and you already thought your brother was plotting to overthrow you, then your brother suddenly admitted he had broken the sacred oath he took after World War II that has fathered a new mortal hero who might be used as a weapon against you. Wouldn't that put a twist in your toga? But I didn't do anything. I'm just a kid. Besides, Poseidon, my dad didn't really have this Master Bolt stolen, did he?" Chiron sighed. Most thinking observers would agree that thievery is not Poseidon's style. But the sea god is too proud to try convincing Zeus of that. Zeus has demanded that Poseidon return the bolt by the summer solstice. That's June 21st, 10 days from now. Poseidon wants an apology for being called a thief by the same date. I hope that diplomacy might prevail, that Hera or Demeter or Hestia would make the two brothers see sense. But your arrival has inflamed Zeus' temper. Now neither god will back down. Unless someone intervenes, unless the Master Bolt is found and returned to Zeus before the solstice, there will be war. And do you know what a full-fledged war would look like, Percy? Bad? Naruto sighed in irritation. Percy, imagine the world in chaos. Nature fighting against itself. Earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes. The other gods will be forced to take sides, and if that happens, millions will die, and even I won't be able to reconcile the differences between the two sides. And then you would be the first to feel my father's wrath. The storm had rolled in on top of camp, and it started to rain. The campers outside stopped whatever they were doing and stared in stunned silence at the sky. Naruto stood up and stretched. Excuse me for a second, gentlemen, I have to deal with my father's little temper tantrum. He made his way outside and extended his arms. Suddenly, a great gush of wind blew from the opposite direction of the storm, blowing the clouds back out to the bay. Naruto whistled at his own accomplishment. Wow, didn't actually think that would work, although maybe dad wanted me to try doing that. I'll have to ask him later. He thought as he put that question in the back of his mind. He made his way back to the porch, where he found Percy gone and Grover and Chiron sitting at the pinnacle table. Hey, where'd Percy go? Upstairs, talking with the oracle about his quest. Chiron answered nonchalantly. You mean the slayer of the mighty python chick that's been dead for a few decades? Yep, that's the one. Okay, never going up to that attic. I hate ghosts. Naruto almost fell asleep while he was waiting for Percy, but he was trying to stay awake to deal with the rest of all this quest business. When he saw Percy's face, he honestly wished he hadn't. Well? Chiron pressed as Percy plopped down on a chair. She said I would retrieve what was stolen. Grover sat forward, chewing excitedly on the remains of a Diet Coke can. That's great. What did the oracle say exactly, Percy? This is important. She said I would go west and face the god that had turned and retrieve what was stolen and see it safely returned. Anything else? Chiron asked. Yeah, she said the child of Olympus would be tested and twice he must be bested. And in the pits of darkness and fear, he would find one he holds dear. A decision made in the night that will decide Olympus' blight. There was utter silence for a few minutes before Naruto spoke. Wow, that's pretty dark and it's about me, great. Percy was obviously feeling for his uncomfortable friend and quickly switched the topic. Okay, so where do we go? And woe's this god in the west? Think, Percy, if Zeus and Poseidon weaken each other in war, who stands to gain? Someone who wants to take over? He guessed. Yes, quite. Someone who harbors a grudge, who has been unhappy with his lot since the world was divided eons ago, whose kingdom would grow powerful with the deaths of millions. Someone who hates his brothers for forcing him into an oath to have no more children, an oath that both of them have now broken. Hades? Chiron nodded and Naruto secretly scowled. The Lord of the Dead is the only possibility. Grover nearly choked on a tin can he was eating. Whoa, wait, what? The Fury came after Percy, Chiron reminded him. She watched the young man until she was sure of his identity, then tried to kill him. Furies obey only one lord. Hades. Yes, but Hades hates all heroes, Grover protested. Especially if he has found out Percy is a son of Poseidon. The hellhound got into the forest, Chiron continued. Those can only be summoned from the fields of punishment, and it had to be summoned by someone within the camp. Hades must have a spy here. He must suspect Poseidon will try to use Percy to clear his name. Hades would very much like to kill this young half-blood before he can take on the quest. Great, Percy muttered. That's two major gods who want to kill me. But a quest, Grover swallowed. I mean, couldn't the Master Bolt be in some place like Maine? Maine's very nice this time of year. Naruto smirked a little. Shinobi lesson number 52. It's never as easy as it seems. Hades sent a minion to steal the Master Bolt, Chiron insisted. He hid it in the underworld, knowing full well that Zeus would blame Poseidon. I don't pretend to understand the Lord of the Dead's motives perfectly or why he chose this time to start a war, but one thing is certain. Percy must go to the underworld, find the Master Bolt, and reveal the truth. By this point, Naruto was practically livid. Chiron just couldn't say it once and be done with it. Oh no, he had to just keep insulting his grandfather, who was, by the way. keeping Sally in good health and had managed to strike a deal with another god from another dimension in order to get his daughter and Naruto's mother back. Not only that, but a war would make his life even more miserable. Lucky enough for Chiron, he was finally finished with his little rant and hadn't noticed the small tornado that was forming around the young demi-deity. Grover, on the other hand, had started eating pinochle cards like potato chips. Look, if we know it's Hades, why can't we just tell the other gods? Zeus and Poseidon could go down to the underworld and crack some heads and we get off scot-free. It's not that easy, Perk. Naruto said, aside from me, no other god can set foot on another god's territory unless they're invited. I'm an exception because I'm a negotiator and even then, I'm still half human. Heroes, though, have special privileges. Despite being half mortal half god, they have no real allegiance to any particular god, which makes them able to do whatever they please. Why do you think the gods always operated through humans in the old stories? So you're saying I'm being used? Not exactly, Perk, though I will say that it's not exactly a coincidence that Poseidon claimed you now. He was probably trying to prevent the other gods from trying to kill you, but he had to claim you due to the situation he's in. He needs you, Perk. Percy turned his gaze to Chiron, is that true? In so many words, yes. You've known I was Poseidon's son all along, didn't you? Chiron shrugged, I had my suspicions. After all, I've spoken to the oracle too. Percy seemed to be having an internal debate with himself before he said, so let me get this straight, I'm supposed to go west and confront the Lord of the Dead, find the most powerful weapon in the universe, and get it back before the summer solstice, in 10 days. Yep, that's pretty much it. Well, aside from that bit about the child of Olympus, you hit it right on the head. Grover was still eating cards, either still scared by Naruto or by the prospect of going underground. You don't have to go, you know. Percy said, I can't ask that of you. Oh, he shifted his hooves. No, it's just that satyrs and underground places, well. He took a deep breath and then stood, brushing the shredded cards and aluminum bits off his t-shirt. You saved my life, Percy. If you're serious about wanting me along, I won't let you down. Percy looked obviously relieved before he turned to Naruto, who was back to playing with his leaf, which was now stuck on his forehead. You don't even need to ask, Perk. I'm coming with you whether you like it or not. Besides, someone's got to make sure you two don't get killed by a god. Percy let out a sigh of relief, thanks G-Man, Naruto. He turned toward Chiron again and asked, so where do we go? The oracle said just to go west. The entrance to the underworld is always in the west. It moves from age to age, just like Olympus. Right now, of course, it's in America. Where? Chiron just gave Percy a blank stare, I thought that would be obvious enough. The entrance to the underworld is in LA. Oh, naturally. So, we just get on a plane and… Naruto slapped Percy on the back of the head, no you idiot. Think about it, your father, Poseidon, is bitter rivals with my father, Zeus. You go in my dad's domain and I can pretty much guarantee you won't be coming out again. But y'all be with us, right? I mean, can't you just ask Zeus to spare us or something? Naruto sighed, yeah, I probably could if I had something of value to him, like the bolt, but otherwise probably not. But you're his son. Naruto deadpanned, who will be immortal after he dies. So unless we get the bolt, I would recommend not taking a plane. Alright, so we're going overland. Percy said nervously as lightning crackled in the sky. That's right, Chiron said, now normally only 2 companions would be able to accompany you. However, Naruto is an exceptional case and will be accompanying you even if I said no, so you will have 3 companions. Grover is 1. Naruto is number 2. The third has already volunteered if you will accept her help. Naruto and Percy looked at each other before saying in unison, gee, I wonder who else would be stupid enough to sign up for a quest like this. Sure enough, the air shimmered behind Chiron before Annabeth became visible as she stuffed her Yankees cap into her pocket. I've been waiting a long time for a quest, seaweed brain, she said. Athena is no fan of Poseidon, but if you're going to save the world, I'm the best person to keep you from messing up. Naruto made a pouty face, hey, what about me? She turned toward him, you're cool, but I doubt that you're very good at coming up with long-term plans. You seem more like a battle strategist to me. And let me guess, poor next to no sense of direction. Naruto frowned a little. Shed hit the nail on the head. Well, I can tell location based on the sun but everything else you said is true. She started to laugh, but at least I know that the Mets are the better team. She stopped laughing and sent him a glare. They haven't been to the World Series since 2000. Yeah, well at least they don't cheat. Yeah, how do they cheat, Naruto? Chiron cleared his throat, breaking Annabeth and the demi-deity out of their self-absorbed argument. Well, if you two are done arguing, I suggest that you get packing. You 4 have a bit of an adventure in front of you. We can only get you to the Manhattan bus terminal. After that, you're on your own. All four of them nodded solemnly and went off to their cabins to pack. It really didn't take Naruto long to pack, considering he always kept enough clothes, money, food, and weapons and sealing scrolls as possible. Of course, the only reason he took any time at all was to put those scrolls in a bag, then seal the bag in a seal on his hand. Naruto found that you had to be very careful when sealing seals within seals, or else the seals go to a pocket dimension that will probably never be found. Anyways, all in all, Naruto had packed over $5,000, 100 golden drachmas, and a baggie of ambrosia and a canteen of nectar. Even though Naruto was sub-immortal, the stuff still gave him headache after he ate or drank too much, probably because it was burning off his mortal cells. He had found this out by having a drinking contest with Mr. D a few days ago. The result was Dionysus had stripped to his underwear and was dancing on the pinnacle table, and Naruto thought that Chiron was a purple bunny. It was funny as hell when they were told what had happened, but both vowed never to speak of it to anyone. Ever. Annabeth was bringing her Magic Yankees cap, which Shed said was a 12th birthday present from her mom. She carried a book on famous classical architecture, written in ancient Greek, to read when she got bored, and a long bronze knife, hidden in her shirt sleeve. Percy was sure the knife would get us busted the first time we went through a metal detector, but Naruto just laughed and said something about Bob won't even notice, which greatly confused the other three. Grover wore his fake feet and his pants to pass as human. He wore a green Rasta-style cap, which Naruto thought was funny, seeing as he really didn't seem like the kind of guy you would see with that hat. A.N. Grover in my story is the black guy from the movie, just cuz he's cooler. He still follows the original's plotline though. His bright orange backpack was full of scrap metal and apples to snack on. In his pocket was a set of reed pipes his daddy goat had carved for him, even though he only knew 2 songs. Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 12 and Hilary Duff So Yesterday, both of which sounded pretty bad on reed pipes. Well, Hilary Duff just sounded bad in general to Naruto, and Mozart was just weird. He honestly preferred listening to the Yoshida brothers, and to that end he brought along his iPod. Much better music than Hilary Duff, though honestly he just didn't really like Western music, which he had no doubt Apollo would take offense to, but he did like Empire of the Sun and Foster the People. The group waved goodbye to the other campers, with Naruto giving various drill instructions to the co-teachers for the combat classes, before they ran to the top of the hill with Thalia's tree on it. Chiron was waiting for them in his wheelchair. Standing next to him was a guy that looked like a surfer that Naruto had seen around camp. The first time he saw him, the only thing he could think of was how expensive it would be buy decent shades for the guy, seeing as he had eyes all over his body. "This is Argus," Chiron introduced the multi-eyed man, "I'll drive you into town, and, keep an eye on things." Naruto and Argus couldn't help but facepalm at the lame, accidental joke, while the others stifled a laugh. Naruto noticed that Luke was running toward Percy and took the opportunity to say goodbye to his closest family member at camp. He walked over and sat down to Thalia's tree. "Hey there Thal, how are you today?" he said jokingly, which earned him a shock on the arm. Yeah, I know, no different. Still trying to figure out a way to get you out of there, but that's gonna have to wait till after the end of this quest." He got no reply. He saw Luke giving Percy something and figured it was about time to go. He sighed, "Well, looks like it's about time for me to go. See you later Thal." He got a light shock on the shoulder, something he figured meant, go get him. Needless to say, it put a smile on his face. Walking over to the rest of his group, he noticed that Luke had given Percy a pair of sneakers with wings on the sides. As he got closer, he heard Luke, "Listen Percy, a lot of hopes are riding on you. So just kill some monsters for me, okay?" Percy smiled and shook his hand. Luke patted Grover's head between his horns and gave a goodbye hug to Annabeth, who blushed so hard she looked like she was about to pass out. Then he turned to Naruto. "Keep him safe alright Godman?" he said with a smile. "Sure, but make sure you follow my training regime for the sword class." Luke smiled and shook Naruto's hand before he turned and ran back down the hill. He turned toward the other side of the hill and began walking down, listening to Percy teasing Annabeth all the while. There was a white SUV parked at the foot of the hill, which Naruto figured was going to be their ride. He stood next to the shotgun door and watched Percy give his shoes to Grover, who activated them and promptly fell over and started flying toward the SUV. Naruto chuckled before he ran in front of Grover and caught him before he could hit the van. "Thanks man," he said as he stood up. "No problem, but seriously, get more practice with those before you use them in combat." Grover looked a little embarrassed and Naruto started laughing. Argus got to the car and unlocked it. Naruto called shotgun, so Annabeth and Grover were in the back. After a few minutes, Percy came down looking a little weary. Not the kind of weary that you would see from someone who has been in war or someone who was really tired, but like had just gotten a lot of information. Looking back to the top of the hill, Naruto saw Chiron in full centaur form, holding his bow in high salute, and what looked to be the apparition of a girl dressed to look somewhat gothic waving to them. Naruto figured it was Thalia, but he was still scared of ghosts, so a little tingle went down his spine. Percy climbed in and sat next to Annabeth and they were off. So what took you so long, Perk? Did Chiron finally give you that sword you used in the museum to keep? Naruto asked. If Percy was surprised that Naruto had guessed what Chiron had given him, he didn't show it. Yeah. It's called Riptide. It's a gift from my father. Naruto nodded and went back to paying attention to the way Argus was driving. He needed to learn the basics, seeing as he had 2 cars of his own somewhere. After about 10 miles, Percy spoke up again. So far so good, he told Annabeth. 10 miles and not a single monster. She gave him an irritated look. It's bad luck to talk that way, seaweed brain. Remind me again, why do you hate me so much? I don't hate you. Cold fooled me. She folded her cap of invisibility. Look, we're just not supposed to get along, okay? Our parents are rivals. Why? Both she and Naruto sighed, the latter wishing that Percy had paid more attention in Brunner's Chiron's ancient history class. Perk, you really should have paid more attention in Brunner's lectures. Athena found Poseidon in her temple with his girlfriend one time and turned her into a monster. Another time, they competed for who would be the patron god of Athens. Our dad created some saltwater spring as his gift to the city, kinda useless if you ask me, and Athena created the olive tree. Because they liked her gift better, so they named the city after her. Annabeth sighed. She really was glad that Naruto had stepped in when he did. She really didn't want to explain all of that. Percy was dumbfounded though. How do you know all of that? Naruto sighed, again, I actually paid attention in Brunner's class. Percy pouted, I did too. Grover and Naruto laughed, only when there were weapons or armor, Perk. Percy pouted a little more before he turned to Annabeth, they must really like olives. She facepalmed and said, oh forget it. Now if Shed invented pizza that I could understand. I said forget it. Argus and Naruto smiled simultaneously, and Argus gave Percy a wink with one of his many eyes. After a minute of silence, Naruto looked at Argus and spoke in Japanese, hey Argus, can you understand me? Argus lifted one of his hands from the steering wheel and gave a thumb up, which Naruto smirked at. Alright then, when you get back to camp, I want you to talk to Dionysus and tell him that I'm setting up a betting ring for when these two get together. Argus' eyes widened in surprise before he smiled mischievously. He'll be betting manager. Just tell him not to tell Athena, Poseidon, or Chiron. Anyone else can bet freely. American dollars and golden drachma will be accepted. Should I put you down for anything? Argus closed most of his eyes in thought for a moment before he replied in Japanese, I'll say 4 years from now put me down for $100 and 20 drachma. Naruto nodded and mentally filed that bet away. Ahem. Annabeth said in the back. Naruto, could you stop speaking Japanese? Not all of us understand it, you know. Naruto gave a fake blush and said, Gomen, Annabeth. Which earned him a shoe in the face. After a couple of hours, they'd made it to the Upper East Side Greyhound bus station, but it was getting dark and had started to rain. Argus dropped them off not too far from where Percy lived. Argus unloaded their bags, made sure they got their bus tickets, and then drove away, the eye on the back of his hand, opening to watch them as he pulled out of the parking lot. Annabeth walked off to find the restroom, and Naruto unsealed a small canteen of sake and took a swig. What? He was thirsty. Looking over to Percy and Grover, he noticed that Percy was staring in the direction of his apartment and that Grover was talking to him about something. As he walked over, he only caught a few choice words, but quickly figured out what they were talking about. Gabe. Your mom married Gabe for you, Grover told said. You call him smelly, but you've got no idea. The guy has this aura, yuck. I can smell him from here. I can smell traces of him on you, and you haven't been near him for a week. Thanks, Percy said. Where's the nearest shower? You should be grateful, Percy. Your stepfather smelled so repulsively human he could mask the presence of any demigod. As soon as I took a whiff inside his Camaro, I knew. Gabe has been covering your scent for years. If you hadn't lived with him every summer, you probably would been found by monsters a long time ago. Your mom stayed with him to protect you. She was a smart lady. She must loved you a lot to put up with that guy if that makes you feel any better. Naruto could tell that it really didn't and that Percy was still angry at his dad for not visiting or doing anything. Percy, we will get your mom back. So don't get all emo on me, okay? Percy looked up to see Naruto standing there looking up at the clouds. Thanks Naruto. Percy said with a smile. No problem, Perk. And also, think about forgiving your father for not being there. It may not seem like it, but he stayed away to protect you in a way. I mean if he had stayed with you and your mom, you would have been hunted by monsters for the entirety of your life. Even though he couldn't be with you or see you directly, he was still watching over you. Percy's face took an angry look but quickly faded to one of confusion. Really, how? Mom said that he never saw me, but you're saying that Hess been watching over me. How is that possible? Well, Percy, the gods have ultimate control over their element. In fact, they could be called the physical manifestations of their elements. So every time you went to the ocean, your dad was watching over you. Just think about it, okay? Sure man, thanks. Percy said with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Naruto knew he'd have a lot to think about during this trip. After a while, the four got bored of waiting for the bus and decided to play hacky sack with one of Grover's apples. Annabeth was pretty good, able to bounce it off her knee, elbow, and almost any other body part. Percy was admiring her from afar in his own way, but Naruto was wondering if he should start a basic ninja training program up at camp. Percy wasn't that bad either, but unlike Annabeth who was more fluid in her movements, his movements were more focused on strength. Then when Naruto got the apple, he did all kinds of tricks with it, bouncing it off his nose, backhanding it and catching it with his foot, you name it. He got looks of awe from everyone before he passed it to Percy, who passed it to Grover, who ate it in a massive chomp. He tried profusely to apologize, but Annabeth, Percy, and Naruto were too busy falling over in laughter. Finally the bus came. As they stood in line to board, Grover started looking around, sniffing the air like he smelled his favorite school cafeteria delicacy, enchiladas. What is it? Percy asked. I don't know, maybe it's nothing he replied, but none of them bought it. We're trouble magnets Naruto thought, since when has it been nothing? Percy, Grover, and Annabeth were looking over their shoulders at a near constant rate, but Naruto didn't. He already had a few guesses as to who or what might be following them, and none of them sounded too terribly good for the demigod group. When they got on the bus, Percy seemed visibly relieved, seeing as how they found 3 empty seats in the back with an empty one across the aisle. The 3 demigods stored their backpacks while Naruto approached some guy that looked exactly like Morgan Freeman that was sitting in the middle seat next to the aisle. Excuse me sir, is this seat taken? Naruto asked politely. No, it isn't. The man replied. Naruto sat down next to the man, who he thought was really weird. Not only did he look like Morgan Freeman, but he sounded like him too. Meanwhile, the rest of his group had sat down and noticed that the 3 Furies had taken seats at the front of the bus and were silently freaking out. Naruto stayed calm and tried to strike up a conversation with the man next to him. So where are you heading? Naruto asked. The man faced Naruto and said, oh, just a ways out of town. Then I'm flying to Charleston, Mississippi tomorrow. I was supposed to take a plane today, but my flight was cancelled due to this storm. What about you? Well, I'm going to LA. The man looked surprised. By land? Yeah, a friend I'm traveling with is afraid of air travel, so we're going by land. It sucks. The man laughed, I can imagine. There was silence for a few minutes as they entered the Lincoln Tunnel. The man leaned back in his chair and said, so you're the negotiator for this realm, huh? Naruto was internally surprised, but feigned ignorance, I'm sorry. The man laughed again and faced Naruto, you know, your mother and father have spoken a lot about you. Well, mainly your mother, your father always felt guilty about sealing Kura into you. Speaking of which, how is she? Naruto had quickly realized that he was sitting next to some kind of god or something, so he decided to reply honestly, I don't know. I haven't talked to her in over half a month. I think she's asleep or something. The man nodded and said, well, she isn't asleep, she's deep in thought about something that probably concerns you in some way. She's always been like that you know, ever since the sage separated her from Chibai. I'm sorry, but who are you? Naruto asked. Ah, now that's the real question. I could tell you my name in this world, which you would recognize immediately, considering I do look particularly unique, but I think it would be better for you to know me by my real name, Amakane, god of wisdom and intelligence in your world. Naruto was somewhat surprised. He had been told by his father that the gods from his dimension had the ability to take vacations to this one, but he didn't expect them to be people like Morgan Freeman. Speaking of which, he had Morgan Freeman sitting next to him. So you're Morgan Freeman? Yep. And god of counsel for my world? Yep. Awesome Tebeo. The mortal god laughed, yep, pretty much. Your father wanted me to tell you that after this summer I'll be teaching you the art of diplomacy when I'm in the city. That's coming up with a plan so that I can teach you while you can still be on Olympus and go to mortal school while taking missions from the gods that need stuff done. Personally, I think it's a bit much, but you Uzumakas always were an industrious bunch, maybe I'll figure something out. Naruto smiled, already did. The solution is Kage Bushnan. I'm surprised that he hasn't figured out that it's the secret to defeating paperwork. Freeman's eyes widened and he smacked his forehead, and that is why we need new blood in the godly councils. What, you didn't know either? No. Wow, don't tell anyone, I could use it to gain me some favors in the future. Freeman smiled, alright then, I won't. Anyways, it looks like it's time for this conversation to end. Your grandpa's minions are coming this way and they don't look happy. Naruto looked down the aisle to see that Ms. Dodds and her sisters were walking toward them and that Percy had put on Annabeth's Yankees cap and disappeared. He turned back to Freeman with a worried look, you going to be okay? Things might get messy. Freeman scoffed, please. I may be mortal right now, but I have millenniums of experience. It'll be fine. Naruto nodded and paid attention to the Furies, who had just transformed into their true states. Their faces were still the same, but their bodies had shriveled into leathery brown hag bodies with bats' wings and hands and feet like gargoyle claws. The handbags they were carrying had turned into fiery whips. The Furies surrounded Grover and Annabeth, lashing their whips, hissing. Where is it? Where? Luckily they hadn't noticed Naruto, or had just thought he was another passenger, seeing as they were focused on Percy's scent. Naruto found this odd, considering that all the other passengers were cowering in their seats. Hess not here. Annabeth yelled. Hess gone. The Furies raised their whips, and Naruto had had enough. Of course, he said, it'd be happy to take a message from you ladies. They turned to see Naruto in full samurai regalia without the helmet. The white lines on his arms and legs had changed to an electric yellow. His shoulder plates now included battle horns surrounding the Uzumaki swirl, and there was a green trident that went through the one on his breastplate. The trident faced downward, and two of the tails on the back of his breastplate held twin lightning bolts heading to both arms. Had redesigned it to be more intimidating and reflect his heritage. Had even made designs for future models, but for now this was the one he was using. The Furies widened their eyes in surprise, Lord Uzumaki, what are you doing here? I'm on a quest. He replied with a steely gaze that would make mortals flinch. I'm guessing that Gramps didn't tell you that you would be up against me, judging by the looks on your faces. No, he didn't, but we have our orders. Now where is Percy Jackson? Annabeth drew her bronze knife. Grover grabbed a tin can from his snack bag and prepared to throw it. Naruto was about to grab his sword from its scabbard. Suddenly everyone in the bus was thrown to the right, with Naruto landing on top of Morgan's lap. The bus slammed against the side of the tunnel, grinding metal, throwing sparks a mile behind them. They careened out of the tunnel and back into the rainstorm. People and monsters were being tossed around the bus and cars were being plowed aside like bowling pins. Somehow the driver found an exit. They shot off the highway, through half a dozen traffic lights, and ended up barreling down one of those New Jersey rural roads where you can't believe there is so much nothing right across the river from New York. There were woods to their left, the Hudson River to their right, and the driver seemed to be veering toward the river. Suddenly, the bus wailed, spun a full circle on the wet asphalt, and crashed into the trees. The emergency lights came on. The door flew open. The bus driver was the first one out, the passengers yelling as they stampeded after him. Morgan had pushed Naruto up and run out himself, putting something in Naruto's pocket in the process. The Furies regained their balance. They lashed their whips at Annabeth while she waved her knife and yelled in ancient Greek, telling them to back off. Grover threw tin cans. Naruto was gripping his sword in a ready stance. Just before a battle broke out, Percy reappeared at the front of the bus. Hey! He yelled. The Furies turned, baring their fangs at him and started stalking up the aisle. Perseus Jackson, you have offended the gods. You shall die. Mrs. Dodd said in an accent that was from somewhere much farther south than Georgia. I liked you better as a math teacher was Percy's snarky reply. The Furies continued stalking up the aisle, and Annabeth and Grover moved up behind the Furies cautiously, looking for an opening. Percy uncapped his pen, which quickly elongated into a shimmering double-edged sword. The Furies hesitated. They'd felt its blade before and obviously didn't like seeing it again. Surrender now and you will not suffer eternal torment. Bracas meias vesamini was Percy's reply. Naruto stifled a laugh, he understood what it meant, but the situation was too dire for him to laugh. Mrs. Dodds and her sisters were about to charge when Naruto intervened. Alright, I think this charade has gone on long enough, don't you? Naruto unsheathed his katana, Percy, Annabeth, Grover, get out. But Naruto Percy said. No buts. I'll let you handle the next one, but all three of these guys are mine. The other three looked concerned, but got out of the bus as Naruto instructed. The Furies tried to chase Percy, but Naruto cut them off. The Furies smirked. So we get to kill the god of the heavenly winds, eh? Alright then, we'll offer you one chance before we send you to the underworld. Get out of the way. Naruto took a thinking pose before he smiled, you know something that all Uzumakas have in common. We're incredibly stubborn. Kyusai Gangnam style. The Furies growled and charged. The first one that met his blade was one of Mrs. Dodd's sisters. She reached out with her claws, only to trip and fall under Naruto's legs. He stabbed down and sent her back to the underworld. The second one stayed back and lashed out with her whip, which Naruto caught and pulled her forward into a dancing pose before spinning her around and breaking her neck, sending her back as well. Mrs. Dodd snarled, "Come on Brad, let's see what you've got." Naruto smirked and created 2 clones that appeared at his sides. They all put their swords in front of them in ready position before walking forward, making a cutting motion with their hands. They cold run because of the close quarters, so it looked like they were skipping. Dodds lashed out with her whip, grabbing the real Naruto and throwing him into the back of the bus, more specifically the bathroom. Well, this is awkward, Naruto thought before he stood up and rejoined the fight. He and his clone surrounded Dodds and danced back and forth, waiting for her to make a move. Finally she did, but was intercepted by a clone who pinned her down. The real Naruto called for a lightning bolt to hit the bus as he exited it. Not but 5 seconds later one of Zues' personal lightning bolts hit the bus. He saw Freeman shaking his head in amusement as he walked up to his friends, shaking his finger at them. End music. "Damn it Naruto, what was that? Our bags were in there," she said, holding back a slap. Naruto style. And no, they weren't. As soon as the fight started I had a clone seal your bags in a pocket dimension. Right now though, we need to get out of here. Dodds isn't dead yet. As if to prove his point, Mrs. Dodds screeched in a call for reinforcements. The rest of the group nodded their heads in ascension and ran off in the pouring rain to the woods of New Jersey. This is it for today, to be continued.